Rachel Bennett stood in her sleek, glass-walled office, gazing out at the glittering city below. The sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the bustling streets, while the world outside was pristine, untouched, perfect. Her fingers lightly grazed the cold glass, her reflection staring back at her. The walls of her empire, built from sweat and strategy, seemed to shimmer with success, yet something gnawed at her, something dark and unsettling that she couldn't shake. Her office was the pinnacle of everything she had worked for. Every corner of the room screamed power. The polished marble floors, the gleaming modern furniture, the view that made the city look small and insignificant. A wealthy, influential woman in a tailored suit, the perfect image of success. But as she stared out at the horizon, her mind felt heavy. She had everything most people dreamed of, but was it worth it? Was this empire really what it seemed? Was her leadership truly what her employees needed? Rachel sighed and turned, her heels clicking sharply on the floor as she walked over to the boardroom. Her team of executives sat around the polished oak table, eyes trained on her as she entered. They knew what she was capable of, what she had achieved. To them, Rachel was the epitome of a powerful CEO, untouchable, always ahead of the game. She stood before them, her gaze unwavering. "I've been looking at our numbers, our systems, and I'm not happy with what I'm seeing," she began, her voice calm, but with an edge that caught their attention. "I've built this company on efficiency, but somehow it feels like we're missing something. We're disconnected, and I'm not sure the people who work for us are as loyal as we think they are." There was an uneasy silence in the room. The executives exchanged glances, some shifting in their seats, others looking down, afraid to speak. "I'm going undercover," Rachel continued, her decision clear. "I'm going to walk through this company in a way no one expects. I'll be one of them. I need to see the reality, the truth, the way we treat our employees, the way we operate at every level." The words hung in the air, their weight sinking in. Rachel wasn't just talking about a PR stunt. She was determined to understand her company from the bottom up. She had seen the glossy reports, the polished reviews, but now she needed to feel the pulse of her company firsthand, the true pulse, and she was ready to expose whatever lies beneath the surface. For a moment, no one spoke, but Rachel knew this was the first step, and it would be one that would change everything. Rachel Bennett's rise to power had not been easy, nor had it been without sacrifice. The memory of her early days, just starting out with nothing but a dream and a relentless drive, was still vivid in her mind. She remembered the nights spent hunched over her laptop, eyes bloodshot as she coded her first software program. She had been alone then, with only the promise of something bigger on the horizon. She had no one to lean on but herself. Her parents had always told her she could do anything, but they hadn't quite understood what she wanted to achieve. They were proud, but there was always a gap between their small-town lives and her big-city ambitions. The first breakthrough came after years of tireless effort. Her software app was picked up by a venture capitalist, and overnight, her idea turned into a thriving business. As her company grew, so did her influence. She hired employees, expanded operations, and built an empire, surpassing competitors with an innovation that was unparalleled. She moved into the high-rise office buildings, the luxury apartments, the fancy cars. The power she had longed for was now in her grasp. But for all her success, something inside her was slowly slipping away. Rachel hadn't had time for a personal life. She had no real friends, just colleagues and acquaintances who admired her from a distance, seeing only the polished exterior of her leadership. She had distanced herself from her family as well, too busy to return phone calls or visits. There was always something more pressing: meetings, projects, deals to close. Her ambition was her only companion, and it was insatiable. Her interactions with her employees had changed over time. What started as enthusiasm and respect for the team who helped her grow became something transactional. She was the boss. They were the workers. Conversations were short, driven by results and efficiency. She had no time to hear about their struggles, their dreams, or their personal lives. She saw them as instruments, tools to get her closer to the next milestone. One afternoon, a conversation with her mentor, Richard, left a bitter taste in her mouth. He was an old friend, someone who had been with her through the darkest days of building her business. He had always been a voice of reason, someone who reminded her to stay grounded, but lately he had grown concerned. "You've built an empire, Rachel," Richard said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "But at what cost? Look around you. What's happening with your people? I've seen how you treat them. Quick to make a decision, quick to let go. You're losing touch. You don't even see it." Rachel had laughed it off at first, the weight of his words sliding off her like water on a slick surface. "I'm building something big, Richard. I'm doing what I have to do. I'm not here to babysit. People are replaceable. This is business." Richard's face darkened. "Business? Or is it your ego talking now?" He paused, watching her carefully. "Don't lose sight of who you are, Rachel. Don't forget that the people who helped you get here matter." She had turned away from him then, brushing off his concern. He didn't understand. He never did. She had worked too hard for this. Too hard to be held back by emotions or personal connections. Her goal was clear: success. And she wouldn't let anything or anyone stand in her way. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered something else, something she couldn't ignore. It was the voice of doubt, of a nagging feeling that maybe Richard was right. Maybe she was losing herself in the rush for more. More money, more power, more prestige. She pushed it aside, as she always did. But even as the empire grew, so did the loneliness. The emptiness she had pushed away was growing louder, and she couldn't silence it forever. As Rachel sat alone in her office that evening, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars, she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. Her success had come at a price. But what was that price? What had she really gained? And more importantly, what had she lost? For the first time in a long time, she looked at her reflection in the window and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Rachel Bennett stood in the dimly lit storage room, the sharp scent of cleaning products filling the air. She adjusted the simple janitor's uniform, pulling the sleeves down to hide her hands, trying to blend into the background. Her high heels, her tailored suits, and the polished confidence she wore like armor were now gone. In their place, she had a faded blue jumpsuit, rubber gloves, and an unremarkable mop in her hand. The transformation was jarring. She had purposefully erased her identity. No one would recognize her. No one would know who she truly was. Her footsteps echoed as she moved quietly down the hall, dragging the mop behind her. The hustle of the building continued around her, the bustling hum of phone calls and meetings. But here, in these forgotten corners, the sounds were different. The hums of machines struggling to work, the whispers of tired workers trying to make sense of their day. Rachel's eyes scanned the worn equipment that was clearly on the brink of falling apart. Broken, patched-up tools, leaking pipes, and corners of the floor stained from neglect. This wasn't the company she thought she was running. She had imagined her employees as motivated, committed people. But as she moved through the building, she started to hear whispers. Conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. In the hallway, a few workers were gathered, chatting during their break. As Rachel passed by, she couldn't help but overhear. "I'm telling you, it's like they want us to fail," one woman said, wiping sweat from her forehead. She looked tired, her uniform wrinkled and stained. "The equipment's been breaking down for months, and no one's even bothering to fix it. They just keep pushing us harder." Rachel's grip tightened on her mop. She wanted to walk up to them, to tell them she was the one they had been working so hard for. But instead, she stayed quiet, invisible in the corner. She could hear another worker speak, his voice tired, defeated. "I'm telling you, if they don't promote me soon, I'm out of here. They've been dangling that carrot in front of me for a year. Same job, same pay, no recognition." Rachel's stomach twisted. This wasn't the future she had envisioned for her employees. The sacrifices they made, the work they put in, it should have meant something more than this. She continued on, her feet dragging with the weight of everything she was hearing. The deeper she went, the more she saw. In the break room, a man sat hunched over a pile of paperwork, looking disheveled and overwhelmed. His shirt was untucked, his eyes bloodshot. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly, standing behind him. He looked up, startled at first. Then, seeing the janitor's uniform, he sighed deeply. "I'm just trying to keep it together. We're understaffed, underpaid. There's no way I'll make it to the end of the month with these wages." The words hit Rachel like a punch. He wasn't talking about a promotion, a bonus, or even basic recognition. He was simply trying to survive. As she mopped the floor in the corner of the room, she felt a pang in her chest. It was no longer just about poor working conditions or broken machines. It was about the lives of the people who kept the wheels of this company turning. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. These were people with dreams, with families, with lives outside of these walls. And yet, she hadn't seen them. She hadn't seen any of this. Rachel's thoughts were interrupted by a loud thud. She spun around, her heart racing, and saw a woman collapse to the floor, gasping for breath. The other workers rushed to her side, their faces pale with concern. "Jess! Jess, are you okay?" someone shouted. Rachel's heart sank. She took a step forward, but hesitation gripped her. She had no business intervening. She was just the janitor. But the woman on the floor wasn't just another employee. She was someone who had been pushing herself too hard, just like the others. A woman who had likely been ignored and forgotten, just like so many of them. The workers scrambled to help Jess, but Rachel couldn't stand by any longer. She approached the group, kneeling beside the woman. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice shaky. One of the workers looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. "She's been working 12-hour shifts all week, hasn't had time to eat or rest. We're all like that." Rachel's mind spun. This was what the company had done. This was the price of her ambition, of the cold, transactional leadership she had embraced for so long. She was the reason Jess had collapsed, because she had ignored the human cost of her decisions. The woman on the floor gasped, her body trembling with exhaustion. Rachel's heart ached with a deep, unshakable guilt. She had built an empire, but at what cost? At whose expense? She helped the workers lift Jess onto a nearby chair, and as they moved her to the first aid station, Rachel stood there, frozen. The reality of what she had seen, the harsh conditions, the exploitation, the pain in their eyes, hit her like a tidal wave. Her mind raced, her emotions twisted in a knot. The systems in place, the leadership she had put in place, had failed. These people, she had failed them. The shame was unbearable. What was the point of all her success if it led to this? What had it all been for? Rachel wiped a tear from her eye, her hand trembling. The once certain CEO had become someone who was now questioning everything she stood for. She had come undercover to understand the truth of her company. But now, the truth of her own heart was clearer than ever. Rachel moved quietly through the narrow hallway, her mop bucket squeaking against the floor. She had learned to keep her head down, to become invisible. But today, something felt different. The tension in the air was heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. In the corner near the supply closet, she heard voices, sharp, hushed, and urgent. She paused, heart pounding, and edged closer to the door left slightly. "Ajar, you keep skimming off the top and no one notices," a man's voice hissed. Rachel peered inside. It was Tom, the operations manager, and Alan, one of his trusted lieutenants. They were leaned in close, smirking. "Vendors know the game," Alan whispered. "They pay a little extra to us. We make sure their contracts get approved. Faster, no questions asked." Tom chuckled darkly. "And the savings from cutting maintenance? Straight into our pockets. It's a win-win. Besides, who cares? The janitors and clerks can deal with broken machines. They're replaceable." Rachel's blood ran cold. She gripped the mop handle so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Every broken printer, every collapsed worker, every tear-streaked face she had seen. They weren't accidents. They were consequences of deliberate greed. Her stomach twisted in revulsion. This wasn't incompetence. It was corruption, rotting away the very foundation she had built with her own hands. Her empire, born from dreams of innovation and fairness, was being poisoned by people she had trusted to lead. She backed away from the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every step she took felt heavier, as though the weight of every lie, every betrayal was pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't breathe. Rachel stumbled into the staff corridor, gulping down air, her mind a storm of disbelief and fury. She leaned against the cold wall, staring at her reflection in the glass panel opposite her. The janitor's uniform she wore seemed to mock her now. She had thought herself powerful, untouchable, but under the surface, corruption thrived. And she hadn't even seen it. Suddenly, a loud, cruel voice broke her spiral of thoughts. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" Tom barked. Rachel whipped around. Across the room, a young intern stood trembling, a clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. I'm sorry," the girl stammered. "I thought the order was approved." "You thought?" Tom sneered, stepping closer, looming over her. "You don't get paid to think. You get paid to do what you're told. Maybe you're not cut out for this place." Rachel's hands balled into fists. The girl's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her body shrinking under Tom's rage. Around them, employees passed by, heads down, pretending not to notice. Rachel felt something snap inside her. A lifetime of ambition, a fortress of pride. It all cracked in an instant. Enough! She threw down the mop and stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "That's enough," she said, loud and clear. Tom turned, startled, his face twisting in irritation. "Who the hell are you two?" But he stopped mid-sentence as Rachel straightened her back, yanked the cap off her head, and locked eyes with him. For the first time, her true self stood fully revealed. "I'm Rachel Bennett," she said, her voice trembling with restrained fury. "I'm the CEO." The colour drained from Tom's face. The clipboard slipped from the intern's fingers, clattering, to the floor. All around them, heads turned, conversations froze, eyes widened. Rachel stepped closer, her presence filling the space, raw and undeniable. Gone was the invisible janitor. Before them stood the woman who had built the company from nothing, the woman they had forgotten to fear. "I've seen everything," she said, voice low and cutting. "The bribes, the broken promises, the way you treat the people who give everything they have to this company." Tom opened his mouth, but no words came out. Rachel turned to the young intern, her expression softening. "You're not the problem," she said gently. "They are." The girl's lip trembled as she fought back tears. Rachel faced the gathered employees who watched with stunned faces, a mixture of hope and disbelief flickering in their eyes. "I built this company to be better," Rachel said, her voice rising. "And I won't let it rot from the inside." She glared at Tom. "You're done here, effective immediately." Silence gripped the room like a vice. Tom's face turned red with humiliation as he stumbled back, muttering incoherently. Alan, still lurking nearby, paled and slipped away. Rachel inhaled deeply, her chest burning with emotion. She had spent so long chasing success that she had forgotten the heart of what she had set out to build. But not anymore. As she stood there, surrounded by the stunned faces of her employees, Rachel knew there was no going back. The real work was just beginning. And this time, she would not look away. The following day, Rachel walked into the boardroom, her heels clicking with a steady rhythm as the door slammed shut behind her. The room was silent, every face turned towards her, every eye watching with anticipation. She had been the one in control, powerful, decisive, a woman who never second-guessed herself. But today, there was no trace of that icy confidence. Today, the walls she had carefully built around herself were crumbling, and the truth she had uncovered had changed her forever. "Sit down," she commanded, her voice firm yet filled with an emotional weight that even she didn't recognize. The management team, Tom, Alan, and the others, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had no idea what was coming. Rachel stood at the head of the table, her eyes scanning the faces of the people who had helped her build this empire. They had been her partners, her colleagues. But now, in the light of everything she had learned, they were nothing more than the embodiment of corruption. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment, allowing the tension to build. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "I know what you've been doing," she said. "The side deals, the bribes, the way you've used this company as a personal playground, at the expense of the workers who keep it running. You thought no one would find out. But I know, and now you'll answer for it." The room was thick with disbelief. Tom tried to speak, but Rachel cut him off. "I've seen the lies," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I've seen how you've exploited these people, how you've stolen from them, how you've destroyed the very foundation of this company. And I am ashamed to say that I let it happen. I let it happen because I was too blinded by success to see the cost. But not anymore." Her gaze hardened as she turned toward each executive. "You're fired. Effective immediately. All of you." There was a collective gasp as the executives stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what was happening. Rachel's eyes swept the room, her anger now replaced with a deep sense of responsibility. She wasn't just taking action for herself. She was doing this for every worker who had been left behind, for every person who had sacrificed their dignity for the sake of profit. "But I'm not done," Rachel said, her voice now steady and unwavering. "This company needs to change, and I will lead it through that change. But first, I must take responsibility for my role in this. I failed you. I ignored the truth for too long, and for that I apologize." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Rachel had never been one to admit her faults. She had built an empire on being unshakable. But today, in front of her staff, she did something far harder than running a company. She humbled herself. "I promise you," Rachel continued, "that I will make this right. No more hidden agendas, no more toxic culture. I will restore fairness and transparency. From now on, this company is employee first. You are the backbone of this operation, and I will ensure that you are treated with the respect and dignity you deserve." Rachel paused, allowing her words to sink in. She turned to the workers standing at the back of the room, those who had been here for years, watching as the company grew, knowing that their hard work had been overlooked and underappreciated. "For too long, we've focused on profits, but now we will focus on you. Better working conditions, fair wages, and a leadership that values compassion over numbers. I am committed to changing the way we do business here. I know this will take time, but I will do whatever it takes to earn your trust. No more shortcuts, no more corruption." There was a long silence before someone from the back of the room spoke up. A middle-aged man, his face lined with years of hard work, stepped forward. His voice was shaky but strong. "It's hard to believe," he said. "You've always been about the bottom line, Rachel. But if you really mean this, if you really change, we'll follow you. We'll trust you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Rachel felt a lump form in her throat as she looked around at the faces before her. Skeptical, uncertain, but also hopeful. She had to prove to them that she was sincere. She had to earn back their trust, one action at a time. "I know you have doubts," Rachel said softly, I don't expect you to believe me right away, but I will work hard every day to show you that I'm not the person I was before. I'm not the person who let this happen." Rachel turned to leave, but before she did, she took one last look at her staff. The future of the company was uncertain, but in this moment, she knew something had changed in her, and that was the first step toward restoring everything she had lost. Later that day, Rachel stood outside the building, looking up at the towering structure she had built. It no longer felt like a symbol of success. It was a reminder of everything she had been blind to. But now, it was hers to rebuild, from the ground up. "Change starts with me," Rachel whispered to herself, her voice filled with determination. And it starts now. The workers had begun to believe in her again, and Rachel knew that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where empathy, integrity, and fairness would guide every decision she made. But there was one final question she had to answer, one that echoed in her mind as she walked back inside. Would she be enough to make the change stick? And as the doors closed behind her, Rachel knew that only time would tell. Rachel stood in the middle of the company's grand lobby, the bright lights reflecting off the polished floors, but her eyes were focused on something much deeper than the surface. It wasn't the building that mattered anymore. It wasn't the profits, the high-rise windows, or the expensive offices. What mattered now was what the company stood for, the truth she had finally embraced. The transformation was evident, not just in the clean, vibrant halls, but in the faces of the employees who passed by her. They no longer looked at her with skepticism or fear. There was trust now, a trust that had been earned through hard, painful change. Rachel had always believed that success was defined by what you could build, what you could achieve. But as she stood there, watching the people who made it all happen, she realized the truth. Success is built by the people who stand beside you, not just the numbers you crunch. She had spent too long measuring her worth by her profits, her accomplishments, her empire. But now it was different. She had learned to measure success by the impact she had on others, by the lives she could help change, by the way her leadership could lift others up. "It's easy to be blinded by success." Rachel's voice echoed in the hallway as she spoke, her words now carrying the weight of her journey. "We get so caught up in what we think we want, in what we think we need, that we lose sight of the truth. But it takes courage to open your eyes to that truth, even when it's ugly. It takes humility to admit when you're wrong, and it takes strength to change." She paused for a moment, as if allowing herself to absorb the magnitude of those words. The journey had been long, filled with uncertainty, and moments where she had almost turned back, but she hadn't. And now, standing in front of her staff, her true partners, Rachel understood that leadership was never about domination or profit margins. Leadership was about people. It was about listening, understanding, and using your position to uplift others, not exploit them. She smiled softly as a few employees walked by, nodding their heads in acknowledgement. The change was slow, but it was real. "Never forget," Rachel continued, her voice resolute. "Leadership is about people, not just profits. If you're in a position of power, you have a responsibility to make sure that power is used for good, not for personal gain. That's the true measure of success." Her gaze lifted to the horizon beyond the glass windows. She thought about all the decisions that had brought her to this point, the mistakes, the learning, and the redemption. And then she asked herself, how would she be remembered? The world wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But in this moment, she knew she had made the right choice to stand up for what was right. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Rachel turned back to face her team, each one of them part of this new chapter, this new world they had built together. She knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but they weren't challenges she would face alone. They were in this together. She took a deep breath, And as the doors opened behind her, she spoke the final words to those who would carry this message forward. What would you do if you saw injustice in your own workplace? Would you turn a blind eye, or would you stand up for what's right? The question hung in the air, not just as a challenge to her employees, but to everyone listening. She was no longer the CEO who turned a blind eye. She was the woman who chose to make a difference. Now it was their turn. It was the world's turn. Rachel paused, a gentle smile playing on her lips. What would you do? And as the story ended, the audience was left with that powerful question, one that echoed far beyond the walls of the company. What would they do?